Absolutely. Here is part 5 of the story. I'm here as my mother's lawyer, the girl told the judge. Then something incredible happened. Expanded to approximately 1,300 words in simple, engaging English without headings, and completely clean content. The summer passed by like pages turning in a book. Each day brought something new for Nadia, new lessons, new people, new challenges. Working in the public defender's office had changed her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. She wasn't just learning about the law anymore. She was starting to understand people's pain, their stories, and how much a simple act of help could mean. She met mothers who were scared just like her own had been. She met young boys who reminded her of her brother. Some didn't even have families to fight for them. Nadia didn't always understand every legal term, but she understood how to listen. And sometimes that made all the difference. Ms. Patel kept giving her small tasks to handle. Once, she asked Nadia to sit in on an interview with a woman whose son had been wrongly accused of stealing. The mother didn't speak much English, and her hands trembled as she explained her son's situation. Nadia listened carefully, then gently translated what she could. After the woman left, Ms. Patel said, "That was excellent. You didn't just translate the words, you made her feel safe. That's what a real advocate does." Every night, Nadia came home a little wiser, a little more confident. Mina would ask her how the day went, and Nadia would share stories about people, not just legal documents. Her younger brother loved hearing them too. He often said, "When I grow up, I want to work with you." One afternoon near the end of the summer, Ms. Patel called Nadia into her office. "I have something for you," she said. On her desk was a sealed envelope. Nadia opened it slowly and gasped when she saw what was inside. It was a letter of recommendation, in official paper with the public defender's logo. It described Nadia's dedication, her courage, her understanding of the law, and her future potential. "This will help you one day, Ms." Patel said, "whether for scholarships or law school. Keep it safe." Nadia couldn't find the words to say how much it meant to her. She only whispered, "Thank you," and hugged the letter close to her heart. The last day of the internship came quickly. Everyone in the office gathered to say goodbye. They gave Nadia a small notebook with all their names and little notes written inside. Some said, "Don't forget us when you're famous." Others said, "Keep fighting for people." Nadia wiped a tear from her eye as she closed the notebook. These people had believed in her when she was just a girl with a folder full of notes. That meant everything. Back at school, things felt different too. Word had spread about what Nadia had done over the summer. Some teachers mentioned it in class. One even asked her to give a short talk during assembly. Standing on stage in front of the whole school was scary at first. But when she began to speak about her mother's eviction case and what she had learned, the students listened. Some were even inspired. Afterward, a shy boy walked up to her and said, "My uncle is having a hard time with rent. Can I talk to you?" Nadia smiled. "Of course, I'm not a lawyer yet, but I'll try to help." She started a small legal awareness club at school with a teacher's support. They met once a week to talk about rights, responsibilities, and how to understand things like leases and contracts. It wasn't a big club at first, but it grew fast. More students came each week, some curious, others with real problems at home. Nadia didn't solve everything, but she gave them hope. And sometimes that was enough. One chilly morning in October, Amina received a phone call that made her pause. It was from the city's housing office. It said they had reviewed her case and wanted to meet her. She went with Nadia, unsure what to expect. At the office, a kind-faced man greeted them. "We've seen what your daughter did," he said, "and we believe more families deserve that kind of support. So we're starting a tenant awareness program, and we'd like your family to be part of it." Amina was surprised. "What does that mean?" "It means your story can help others," he explained. "We want Nadia to speak at community centers, help explain tenant rights to families, and even meet with city leaders who are trying to improve housing laws." Nadia looked at her mother. Amina nodded slowly, holding back tears. They agreed to be part of the program. That month, Nadia began speaking, not just in schools, but at neighborhood meetings, churches, and community centers. Sometimes she would just sit with people and answer questions. Other times, She stood at a podium with a microphone and shared her story from the courtroom, the story that had started with fear but ended with strength. One day after one of her talks, an elderly woman came up to her and held her hands. "My granddaughter is just like you," she said softly. "But she thinks no one will listen to her. Now I'll tell her they will." Nadia never forgot that moment. The biggest surprise came when the judge who had handled her mother's case invited her back to the courthouse again. But this time, it wasn't just to observe. The judge was holding a youth leadership event, and she wanted Nadia to speak as the closing guest. On the day of the event, the courtroom was full of students, parents, and officials. Nadia stood at the front holding her notes. She looked around the room and remembered the first time she had been there, scared and unsure. She took a deep breath and began. "My name is Nadia Remen. I'm 16 years old. I'm not a lawyer. Not yet. It can protect, it can support, and it can give people a voice. I once stood in this very room speaking for my mother. I didn't have a degree, but I had love, and I had hope. That was enough to begin." The room was silent as she spoke. Even the judge smiled as Nadia continued. "I believe every young person has power. We just need someone to believe in us. My father always told me the law is for everyone, and now I tell that to others." When she finished, the audience clapped. Some even stood up. Nadia didn't know what to say, so she just smiled and stepped down. Later that evening, as she sat with her mother on the couch, she leaned her head on Amina's shoulder. "Do you think Baba saw me today?" she asked softly. Amina kissed her head. "No, he did." The lights in the living room glowed warmly. Apartment, once filled with fear, now held laughter, peace, and dreams. Nadia looked at her father's photo on the shelf and whispered, "I'm still learning, but I won't stop." And from that day forward, she never did. Let me know if you'd like a version of this full story compiled together, or if you want to continue with another story title. ChatGPT said, "Of course." Here is part 4 of the story. "I'm here as my mother's lawyer," the girl told the judge. Then something incredible happened. Written in simple and engaging English, expanded to approximately 1,300 words, with no headings and no inappropriate content. The next few days after the court hearing felt like a dream for Nadia and her mother. The fear that had lived in their hearts for weeks was gone. Their apartment, which once felt like it could disappear at any moment, now felt like home again. The light through the windows seemed brighter. Even the floor didn't creak as loudly. Everything felt calmer. Amina smiled more now. She came home from work a little lighter, her steps less tired. At dinner, she told stories from her job and she laughed again. Not just a little, but a real warm laugh that made her children laugh too. Nadia's younger brother, Sami, who had been quietly worried without fully understanding what was going on, finally asked, "Are we going to move, Mama?" Amina smiled and shook her head. "No, sweetheart, thanks to your sister, we're staying right here." Sami turned to Nadia with wide eyes. "You're like a real lawyer." Nadia smiled shyly. She still couldn't believe everything that had happened. In her room, the folder with all her court documents was now neatly closed and tied with a ribbon. She didn't want to throw it away. It felt special, like a symbol of everything she had learned and achieved. Then there was the card, the one given to her by the lawyer from the public defender's office. Nadia kept it safely in a drawer. She looked at it every day, but hadn't called yet. She wasn't sure what to say. She was just a 16-year-old girl after all. But a small part of her whispered, "You're more than that now." One morning, a letter arrived in the mail. It had the city logo on the envelope. Mina opened it at the table, thinking it might be another bill. Instead, she gasped and handed it to Nadia. The letter was from the judge, the same one from their court hearing. It was short and formal, but the words made Nadia's hands tremble. She read aloud, "Dear Nadia Remen, your courage, preparation, and respectful presence during the recent housing case caught my attention. Young people like you remind us that justice lives not just in books but in the hearts of those who believe in fairness. I would like to invite you to visit the courthouse again and observe a few other hearings as a guest." Nadia blinked. "Shh, invited me back?" Amina nodded, tears in her eyes again. "She believes in you, just like I do." With her mother's encouragement, Nadia called the number written at the bottom of the letter. A kind assistant answered and arranged a date for her to visit. The following week, Nadia returned to the courthouse, this time not as a worried daughter, but as a guest. She wore the same black blazer and white shirt, but this time she felt different. She felt stronger, more sure of herself. When she entered the building, the guards even remembered her. One of them said, "Back again, little lawyer." Nadia smiled, "Just visiting today." She was guided to a special seat inside one of the courtrooms where a different judge was presiding. This time, she didn't have to speak. She just watched. She saw lawyers argue their cases, judges ask sharp questions, and people respond with nervous voices, some calm, some scared. But through it all, Nadia paid attention. She took notes. She noticed how the lawyers spoke with respect, how they stood up for others, and how they used the law to make things better. After the hearings ended, the judge invited her into his chambers for a few minutes. "So you're the young lady I've heard about," he said with a warm smile. "Handled your mother's case with wisdom and grace." "Thank you, sir," Nadia replied, her voice soft. He leaned forward. "What are your plans after school?" Nadia hesitated, then said, "I want to study law. I want to help people like my mom, people who don't have money for lawyers." He nodded thoughtfully. "You already started doing that. If you ever need help, letters of recommendation, or guidance, just ask. We need people like you in the system, smart, kind, and brave." Nadia left the courthouse that day with a new sense of direction. The world suddenly felt bigger, but instead of being scary, it felt full of possibilities. She called the woman from the public defender's office just like she had promised herself she would. They met for tea one Saturday morning. Her name was Ms. Patel, and she told Nadia all about how she had once been the first in her family. "To become a lawyer, I didn't have fancy tutors," Ms. Patel said. "I just had hunger to learn, like you." They talked for hours, and by the end of the meeting, Ms. Patel handed her a form. "This is for our summer student program. It's not a job, but it's a start. You'll observe cases, learn how to write briefs, and help organize paperwork." Nadia stared at the form. "Can I really apply?" "You already proved yourself in a real courtroom. This is the easy part." With her mother's help, Nadia filled out the form and submitted it the next day. A week later, she received an email she had been accepted. The summer program would last 2 months, and it would begin in June. When school ended, Nadia began her time at the public defender's office. First, she just filed papers and brought coffee. But as days passed, she started sitting in meetings, helping with research, and even asking questions. Miss Patel gave her a stack of beginner legal books. Nadia read them all. One afternoon, Miss Patel handed her a small case file. "Tell me, what'd you think of this?" she said. Nadia opened the folder and read carefully. It was about a woman who had been given a fine she couldn't afford. Nadia looked up and said, "The notice was mailed after the fine deadline." "That's not fair," Miss Patel smiled. "Good catch." "That's what I saw too." Bit by bit, people in the office started calling her the intern with the courtroom heart. Her story had spread quietly, and others admired her courage. Nadia didn't let it go to her head. She stayed humble, always asking questions, always trying to do better. One evening, she walked into her apartment after another day at the office. Her little brother ran to her. "Did you win another case?" he asked excitedly. Nadia laughed. "Not yet. But I helped someone today." Amina kissed her daughter on the forehead. "You help someone every day, Nadia. You helped me. You helped this family. And now you're helping others. Your father would be so proud." Nadia looked at the shelf again, where her father's photo still stood beside his books. She smiled, feeling close to him even though he was gone. She didn't just want to be a lawyer anymore. She was already becoming one step at a time. And all of it had started with one brave sentence in a courtroom on a day when most people would have stayed silent. Let me know when you're ready for part 5, and I'll continue the story in the same style and length. Of course. Here is part 3 of the story. "I'm here as my mother's lawyer," the girl told the judge. Then something incredible happened. Expanded to approximately 1,300 words in simple, engaging English, without headings and with clean content throughout. Nadia took a deep breath as the judge nodded for her to begin. Her palms were slightly sweaty, and her heart was pounding so loudly it felt like everyone in the room could hear it. But she stood tall, opened her folder carefully, started reading from the page she had practiced the night before. "Your Honor," she began, "we are here today because my mother, Amina Remen, is being taken to court for eviction. I believe the eviction is unfair, and I have some important points to explain." The courtroom was still. The landlord and his lawyer shifted in their seats, watching her closely. Her mother sat quietly behind her, hands folded in her lap, eyes full of emotion. Nadia turned the page in her folder. First, she said, "My mother has not refused to pay rent. She fell behind because of a family emergency. She tried to work it out with the landlord. She wrote 2 letters asking for a payment plan. She even offered to pay extra each month to catch up." The judge looked down at the papers in front of her. "Do you have copies of those letters?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor." Nadia stepped forward and handed over 2 neat copies, carefully stapled and labeled. The judge read them slowly, nodding. Nadia continued. "Second, the law says a tenant must be given a written notice at least 30 days before the eviction. Hearing in this case, the landlord gave my mother only 12 days. She pulled another document from her folder. "This is the notice we received, and this is the envelope with the postmark on it. You can see the date." The judge took the paper and checked the date. Then she looked at the calendar on her bench. She didn't say anything, but her eyebrows lifted slightly. The landlord's lawyer looked uncomfortable. Nadia's voice grew a little stronger. "Third, we have proof that some rent payments were made in cash. My mom always paid on time before the emergency. We have receipts signed by the landlord himself." The landlord's lawyer quickly stood. "Your Honor, the cash receipts are hard to verify. Anyone can make those up." The judge held up her hand. "Let her finish." Nadia calmly handed over the receipts. "They're written in the landlord's handwriting. We have 3 of them. They match the exact amounts of our rent." The judge looked over the documents, flipping the pages slowly. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then the judge asked a question that surprised Nadia. "How old are you?" "I'm 16, Your Honor." The judge leaned back in her chair, clearly thinking. "And you put this together yourself?" "Yes, ma'am," Nadia said, trying not to show how nervous she still felt inside. "I used my father's law books. He passed away last year. But he always said the law should help people, not scare them. I just wanted to help my mom." For a moment, the judge's face softened. She adjusted her glasses and looked over at the landlord and his attorney. "What do you have to say about the payment plan requests?" The landlord's lawyer stood up again, Your Honor. "The landlord has the right to be paid in full. He sent the notice when he decided the situation couldn't continue. But the notice was late," the judge said firmly. "That's not a small mistake. And if the tenant tried to resolve the problem, it should have been considered." The landlord looked frustrated. He whispered something to his lawyer, who frowned and nodded. Nadia waited silently, clutching her folder. Her knees were starting to feel weak, but she held herself steady. She had done everything she could. The judge looked at Amina. "Do you have anything to add?" Amina stood, her voice quiet but strong. "All I ever wanted was a chance to pay what I owed. I never meant to avoid anything. I work hard, and I'm doing my best. My daughter has been helping me because we couldn't afford a lawyer. I didn't know she would go this far, but I'm grateful. I didn't expect to be in court with my own child speaking for me." The judge smiled faintly. Then she tapped her pen against the desk. "Here's what I see.
Oh.
The tenant has made an effort to fix the situation. There were requests for payment, plans that were ignored. The legal notice was not served properly, and rent receipts were provided. This tells me that eviction is not the right answer at this time." Nadia's heart skipped a beat. She looked at her mother, who was holding her breath. "I'm dismissing the eviction request," the judge said clearly. "The landlord must allow a reasonable time for the tenant to pay the overdue rent. I suggest both parties come to an agreement within the next 10 days. The courtroom was quiet, but Nadia felt like cheering. She didn't, of course. She simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor." The landlord's lawyer looked unhappy, but said nothing. The landlord shook his head and picked up his briefcase, clearly frustrated. As the judge moved on to the next case, Nadia turned to her mother. Amina was crying softly, wiping her eyes. She leaned forward and hugged her daughter tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it?" Nadia smiled through tears. "We did it, Mama." As they left the courtroom, something surprising happened. A woman in a gray suit approached them. She was one of the lawyers from the public defender's office, and she had been sitting in the back during the hearing. That was incredible. The woman said to Nadia, "You spoke better than some first-year law students I've seen." Nadia blushed. "Thank you." "Have you ever thought about studying law?" the woman asked. "Yes," Nadia said quietly. "It's been my dream since I was little." The woman handed her a business card. "Well, if you ever want help or need a mentor, call me. I have a program for students like you. You're smart, brave, and clearly very capable." Nadia took the card with both hands. Felt like more than just a piece of paper. Felt like a door had opened, one she never thought she'd reach this soon. On the bus ride home, Amina held her daughter's hand tightly. They didn't speak much, but their silence was full of peace. The weight that had been on their shoulders for months was finally lifting. Back at home, Nadia placed her folder of papers on the shelf next to her father's old law books. She looked at his picture and smiled. "We did it, Baba," she whispered. "Just like you taught me. Let me know when you're ready for part 4 and I'll continue in the same style." "Of course. Here's the part 2 of the story. I'm here as my mother's lawyer," the girl told the judge. Then something incredible happened. Expanded to approximately 1,300 words in simple, engaging English, without headings and no inappropriate content. The house was unusually quiet the morning Nadia woke up to begin her final preparations. There were only 2 days left before the court hearing. The letter with the court address and time was pinned to the refrigerator door. She stared at it for a moment before sitting at the table, spreading out her notes once again. It looked more like a student's science fair project than a legal case. Papers with underlined sentences, sticky notes, and pages from old books her father once studied. But to Nadia, it was a lifeline. It had made copies of every rent payment her mother had ever made, even the ones done in cash that the landlord tried to pretend didn't exist. She had organized all the communication between her mother and the landlord into a timeline. She even printed out parts of the housing law that said a tenant couldn't be evicted without proper notice. And in her mother's case, the notice had come too late. Nadia knew this could be the key to everything. That evening, her mother came home looking tired, carrying her work bag on one shoulder and groceries in her hand. Nadia helped her put the items away, then said softly, "Can we go over the documents?" "One more time?" Amina smiled weakly and nodded. "If it makes you feel better." They sat down, and Nadia explained everything she had learned. She pointed out where the landlord had failed to give enough notice, how the rent payment plan had not been considered, and how her mother had written letters asking for help. Amina listened with amazement. She had no idea her daughter had come this far. There was a calm strength in Nadia's voice, like she believed every word she said. For the first time in weeks, Amina felt something warm in her chest. Hope. After dinner, Nadia pulled out the black blazer she had bought. She tried it on again, in front of the mirror. Her mother watched her from the doorway. "You look like your father," she said with a proud smile. Nadia turned to her. "You think he would be proud of me?" "He would be more than proud," her mother replied. "He would be standing in that courtroom right beside you." Nadia went to bed that night thinking about her father. She remembered how he used to quiz her on history and teach her big words from his law books. He would always say, "The law is not just for lawyers, sweetie. It's for anyone who wants to stand up for what's right." Those words now echoed in her heart. The next day, she asked her teacher if she could leave school early the following morning. "We have a court hearing," she said honestly. Her teacher, Mrs. Hampton, looked surprised. "Are you okay, Nadia?" "We're okay," Nadia said. "I'm just going to support my mom." Mrs. Hampton nodded and gave her a pass to leave. As Nadia walked home, she felt her heart beat a little faster.
Ow.
It was happening. The day was coming. She didn't know how it would go, but she had already made up her mind she would not walk away, no matter what. That night, she practiced. One last time. She stood in the living room while her little brother pretended to be the judge. Please state your name, he said in a serious voice, trying not to laugh. Nadia smiled and stood tall. My name is Nadia Remen, and I'm here on behalf of my mother. And what's your argument? He asked, still pretending. She cleared her throat. The landlord gave notice too late. He did not follow the rules required by law. My mother asked for a payment plan and got no response. You're not trying. To avoid payment, we just want fairness. Her brother clapped, even though he didn't fully understand what she said. Her mother laughed from the kitchen, the first real laugh in a while. When morning came, Nadia dressed slowly. She wore the black blazer, a white shirt underneath, and black pants. Her hair was tied neatly in a ponytail. She carried a small folder of notes and documents. Amina wore her best scarf and a plain, long dress. She looked nervous, but calm. They rode the bus together, sitting side by side. Nadia looked out the window, repeating her notes in her head. She tried to picture the courtroom. She didn't know if it would be big or small, serious or relaxed. All she knew was that the man trying to take their home would be there. She had to be ready. When they arrived, the courthouse was a tall building with wide steps. They climbed them slowly. Inside, everything smelled like old books and cleaning spray. People rushed around with files, some in suits, others in uniforms. Nadia held her mother's hand tightly. They reached the courtroom door and waited for their case to be called. The landlord was already inside, wearing a sharp suit and talking to a man who looked like a lawyer. He glanced at Nadia and Amina, then turned back. Without a second look, when the clerk finally called their case, Nadia took a deep breath. They walked in together and stood before the judge's bench. The room was quiet. The judge, a tall woman with glasses, looked over her files. Who represents the defendant? She asked, glancing at Amina. Before her mother could speak, Nadia stepped forward and said, Your Honor, I am here as my mother's representative. The judge raised an eyebrow. Are you an attorney? No, Your Honor, Nadia replied calmly. But my mother can't afford one. I've studied the housing laws. I have all the documents. I'm asking to speak on her behalf. The room was silent. Even the landlord's lawyer looked puzzled. The judge looked closely at Nadia, then at Amina, then back at Nadia again. You understand this is an official court hearing? Yes, ma'am. I understand. The judge leaned back slightly. Very well, I'll allow it for now, but keep it respectful and focused. Nadia nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. She turned to her folder, heart racing. This was it. Everything she had worked for, all the long nights, all the reading, came down to this moment. She didn't look at the landlord. She didn't even look at the lawyer. She looked only at her notes and at her mother's eyes, full of quiet trust. And then, with all the strength she had, she began to speak. Let me know when you're ready for part 3, and I'll continue the story in the same style. Of course, here's the expanded part, 1,300 words of the story. I'm here as my mother's lawyer. The girl told the judge, then something incredible happened, written in simple English, engaging style, without headings or any inappropriate content. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the letter came. The sun was barely shining through the dusty window of their small apartment. Nadia sat on the edge of the couch, helping her little brother with homework, when she heard her mother gasp softly. Amina stood frozen at the mailbox, a brown envelope in her hand. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Her eyes quickly scanned the words. Then she lowered the letter and let out a long, tired sigh. Nadia saw her mother's face change. It was the same look she had seen many times over the past year, fear mixed with worry. What is it, Mama? Nadia asked gently, standing up and walking over. Her mother didn't answer at first. She simply handed the letter over. Nadia took it with both hands, her eyes moving slowly across the bold print at the top. It was a court notice their landlord had filed for eviction. A court hearing had been set in 2 weeks. They were being taken to court because of unpaid rent. Nadia felt her stomach twist. She knew things had been tough, but she didn't know it had. Reached this point since her father passed away, life had changed completely. Her father used to be the one who paid the bills, fixed broken things, and always made sure everything was okay. He had been a paralegal before he died, a quiet man who loved books and kept stacks of law journals around the house. He believed in fairness, and he taught Nadia to stand up for what was right. But after his sudden illness, the family was left with very little. Amina worked long hours cleaning offices. Even though she came home exhausted every night, she barely made enough to keep food on the table. The rent had fallen behind when she had to pay for her own mother's medical bills overseas. She had explained that to the landlord, but he hadn't cared. Now they had just 2 weeks to prepare for a court case that could decide if they had a place to live or not. Nadia sat quietly at the kitchen table that night, staring at the letter. Her mother was resting after work, and her younger brother had fallen asleep on the couch. The apartment was still. She reached up and pulled one of her father's law books from the shelf. It was dusty, but the pages were full of notes and highlights. Nadia opened it and started to read. She didn't understand everything, but some of the words looked familiar. She kept reading, flipping through chapters, and writing things down in a notebook. She felt something spark inside her, a sense of hope, even in the middle of fear. Maybe, just maybe, she could help. The next day at school, Nadia sat quietly during lunch, going through more notes. Her best friend Layla leaned over and asked, "What are you doing?" Nadia hesitated for a second. Then she whispered, "We got a court letter. My mom might lose the apartment. I want to help her." Layla looked confused. "But you're not a lawyer." "I know," Nadia said, "but I've read my dad's books. I think I can understand enough to make a difference. Maybe I can help her in court." Layla stared at her like she was crazy, but Nadia didn't care. That afternoon, she went to the public library after school. She checked out more books on tenant rights and housing laws. She took notes on everything. She even asked the librarian for help finding past eviction cases. At home, she read out loud to herself, practicing her voice, trying to sound clear and confident. Each evening, she sat with her mother and went through every document they had, the lease, the rent receipts, the letters between her mother and the landlord. Her mother didn't understand why Nadia was spending so much time on it. "You're just a child," Amina said gently one night. This is not something you can fix." But Nadia only smiled. Baba always said to fight for what's fair. He believed in the law. "I believe in you, Mama, and I believe we still have a chance." Amina hugged her daughter tightly, her eyes wet with tears. She had never seen Nadia like this, so focused, so determined. It gave her strength just to watch her. 1 week before the court hearing, Nadia did something bold. She went to the local community legal clinic. She wore her neatest clothes and carried her notes in a folder. When she reached the small office, a kind receptionist greeted her. "Can I help you?" "I need to understand how to defend against an eviction," Nadia said. "It's for my mother." The woman looked surprised, but she nodded and brought out a pamphlet. She explained a few basics, then paused and asked, "Are you planning to get a lawyer?" Nadia shook her head. "We can't afford one." The woman leaned closer. "Do you have anyone speaking for your mom in court?" "Yes," Nadia said, her voice steady. "Me." There was a long pause. The woman smiled softly and said, "That's brave. Just know the judge may not allow it. You can still prepare. If you bring documents and speak clearly, sometimes that's enough." Nadia thanked her and left with more resources in her hand. Her heart was beating fast, but she felt more ready than ever. That weekend, she found an old black blazer in a second-hand store. It was a little big, but she cleaned it and ironed it. She practiced standing in front of the mirror, introducing herself like a real lawyer at night. She imagined the courtroom, the judge, the landlord, the rows of seats. She imagined standing up, her voice strong, defending her mother. The thought scared her, but it also gave her hope. She didn't know what the judge would say. She didn't know if she would be allowed to speak. But one thing was clear in her heart: she would not let her mother face this alone. Every night before bed, she looked at her father's picture on the shelf. "I'll do my best, Baba," she whispered. "I'll make you proud." And when Monday morning came, with just 2 days left until the hearing, Nadia zipped her notes into a folder, polished her shoes, and prepared herself for the moment that would change everything. She was not just a teenager. She was her mother's daughter, and now she would try to be her voice in court. Let me know when you're ready for part 2. I'll expand it next in the same style.